Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone to Leading the Conversation. My name is Warren Boykin. I'll be your host this afternoon uh, from NAMI, Northern Illinois in Rockford, Illinois. It's my pleasure to introduce or to share this afternoon's session with Cody Barillo. She is a therapist at Four Corners Wellness Center. Um, And our topic today is understanding grief, a very important topic. Uh, Actually, I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to see a full screen.
Fair
Um,
enough.
Cody, did you want to say anything about your background before we get started or what you
You
do?
did well. I am a therapist here at Four Corners Wellness Center in Rockford. I am also part of the Haven Network. I'm the vice president on the board of directors there. It's a perinatal hospice and bereavement center. I do all their volunteer therapy there as well too. Um, so some of you guys might know me from previous speaking engagements, not just through NAMI, but through the community in general. But everybody who does know me knows that I do specialize in grief and bereavement. That is 100% of my caseload.
All right. Well, I'm going to be sharing the slides for Cody. So just tell me when you want me to change screens. I'll go ahead and um,
Sure.
bring that up. And not exactly sure what our guests are seeing. Let me just make a brief statement. This is a webinar, so your questions, if you have them during the presentation, should be entered into the Q&A box. Um, Hopefully you'll see that on your Zoom screen, and you can type your questions, or if you like, I would be able to activate your microphone and have you ask your questions live. But we hope that you'll have lots of questions. And will there be time at the end of the presentation to?
Yeah, there's time at the end, but if you guys have a question during the presentation, please feel free to pop on and, spark conversation.
All right. Well, let's get this thing started. I might pop over to get a second workstation set up. We've got uh, a volunteer here in the studio with us, so uh, I'll be doing a little technical stuff in the background, but I'm going to turn it over to you, Cody. So thank you very much for joining
Wonderful.
us.
Warren, if you do the technical things, am I able to turn the PowerPoint to the next slide?
Good question. Let's go ahead and
Like, I don't want to get stuck with all of us here.
you got a good idea. I think I'll just sit here and
Okay, no worries.
mind the store. Okay.
I was like, I can holler too.
All right. Yeah, I'll try to stay focused here. All right.
No.
All right. So we're on our first screen, and feel free to just tell me when you'd like to switch.
Sure, wonderful. So I just wanted to welcome everybody here today. We're doing understanding grief. I think grief is a very important topic, not only because I'm biased and it's my specialty here as a therapist, but everybody deals with grief. It is not, it doesn't discriminate in any way, whether you have a mental illness or not. Most of us are going to experience grief, if not all of us, at some point in our life, whether it's not necessarily has to be a loss of a person, but it can be a loss of a job, a move, a relationship, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a physical loss. So I think it's very important to understand that people can go through these grief processes, whether it's an actual human being person, an animal, a connection. But I think it's very important that we all are aware of it and understand kind of what that looks like. So go ahead, Warren. Thank you. And if anybody has ever heard the word grief, you probably have heard about the wonderful woman on our screen here, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She's a wonderful woman who studied grief, and she wrote a book in 1969 called On Death and Dying. And this is where us as a culture kind of developed this idea, where she put out stages, and it's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And those are what we have kind of adopted as an American culture as those 5 stages of grief. So if anybody is familiar with grief, they should know the 5 stages, or at least have heard of it, right? So, but I want to go to the next slide here and talk a little bit about the truth about what this looks like. So she didn't actually write these for us to interpret this as a grief process. for those who are experiencing a loss. It is actually written for those who were terminally ill, which actually makes a lot more sense with the bargaining, the acceptance and things like that. So she wrote it for those who were experiencing the process of dying, where we as a culture, because we're an anti-death, emotion phobic culture in America, we were like, hey, sounds really good, and we're going to go ahead and take that on. So, but the truth is, it isn't orderly. It's often messy. Anybody who's ever experienced grief in their own personal life should know, that it isn't necessarily stages, right? And there are more than 5 feelings, right? So you shouldn't just be feeling those 5 stages of feelings, right? You are feeling more than denial and anger and bargaining and acceptance, and depression, right? So it's more than 5 feelings. And sometimes in the clinical terms, we utilize a word called paradoxical feelings. This is where some people experience 2 very opposite feelings at one time. So for instance, if you've lost a loved one and you are going through this process of grief and you're experiencing a happy moment, all of a sudden you might feel guilty for feeling happy at that same time. So as you know, it's not just 5 stages. It's not orderly. It's very messy. Sometimes it's 1 step forward, 6 backwards, twice to the left, once in a circle, right? It's just kind of all over the place. It is not an orderly stage-like process that I think people took Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work and made that into that. So, but I do want to talk about too, this grief versus mourning, because we don't talk about death, because we don't really accept the feelings that go along with that. I wanted to talk about the difference between grief and mourning that everybody should be aware of. This is a very basic piece of knowledge. And this seminar I'm teaching today is more of just touching on those basic pieces of grief that anybody can take away with. I do teach further things through Four Corners, sometimes on complex mourning or grief, more deeper things. So do want to know more, let me know and I can get you my information. But for the sake of the hour that we have here, we're going to talk about that process of grief versus mourning. Okay, so grief is everything that you feel on the inside about a death or a loss. So any thoughts, emotions, physical symptoms, and even unexpected behaviors are all a part of grief. So because culturally we don't talk about the differences, we utilize these interchangeably, when in reality they're actually not interchangeable. So if you look at maybe something like an iceberg, right, above the water is actually mourning, and underneath of it is grief, right? So what you see on the outside, as we'll talk about here in a second, is that mourning, and then underneath of that is that grief. So everybody feels grief when they experience a death or a loss, no matter what. It's just those things that you feel on the inside there. And I also think too, when it comes to grief and mourning, we utilize what's called a goldfish phenomenon. And if anybody has children or who has experienced this themselves as a child, I like to call it the goldfish phenomenon because it involves a goldfish. So because we don't talk about it and we don't share the differences between this, and we don't educate our culture on grief or mourning, when you get a goldfish as a child and that you're away at school, the goldfish dies, your parents are pressured to go to the store, go to the pet store and go grab a new one and replace it while you guys are gone, and hope that you don't notice the difference, right? And what should be happening is we utilize that experience as a way to bring up these differences and talking about, it's okay to feel this grief, and here's how we get into this active mourning. And it is a really good avenue for us to talk about death and loss, because this is a part of our life. But again, we don't, as a culture, often talk about these things. So that goldfish phenomenon is kind of an example of why we took Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, and then also we don't really know the difference between grief and mourning. So we'll go ahead and move on to mourning. So like we said, grief is anything that is on the inside, and mourning is the exact opposite. So, and it's anything on the outside. Again, it's that top of the iceberg. It's what you see outside of that water, but in reality, that iceberg is really deep under the water. And that under the water is that grief aspect. But again, that mourning is what you see. So grief is, it's also known as grief gone public. So it's things that you're showing and doing about your grief process. So it can be crying, can be talking to somebody about the loss, can be writing, it can be journaling, it can be putting together a photo display. You know, if you guys have any other ideas, you know, what are some examples of mourning? I'd love to see that in the chat, see if you guys, you know, have any examples to offer. There are so many. And again, you know, it doesn't mean you're not, you know, well, I'll stop there because I don't want to ruin the next
I
future
want
slides. Yeah, go ahead.
to grief and mourning as obviously a very personal topic.
Absolutely.
And I just recently lost my mother-in-law.
I'm so
My
sorry.
wife's mom passed in May, the end of May. And so one of the things that I was thinking of about mourning the outside thing was the funeral service. You know,
Yes.
there's like a ceremony, and you know, depending on a person's uh, faith or community that they belong to, people have different traditions that they use. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. And a bit of a concern that, you know, I have now is a lot of the funerals are now kind of going away, right? We don't often celebrate, you know, we do, or we do celebrate a life, right? And it might be a year later, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I am a firm believer that you do have to start that mourning process as soon as you possibly can. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't start it later, right? But you're running into complications, but that act of mourning starts at a funeral service a lot of the time, you know,
Mhm.
so it's a really important aspect of grief and loss.
I think one of the things that might make it a little more difficult for people is the fact that families are so spread out across the country. There's a lot of travel, and the
Absolutely.
cost
Oh,
is
the cost is a big barrier for a lot of people.
right,
You know, and
right.
I know that there's some 501(c)(3)s out there that will help pay for funerals, but it's often not for your average individual who passes, right? It's more for special populations.
I
Um,
wasn't even aware that there were things that could help, and
yeah,
if it happens unexpectedly, that's a huge cost. That, and like
yeah,
you
that
said,
you're not expecting.
yeah, and people don't sometimes have the resources to uh, celebrate a person's life the way that they would like to.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is too, I think a lot of the times people assume a service or, you know, a ceremony has to be through a funeral home. It has to be through, I mean, obviously, if you want the person there not cremated, it has to be through a funeral home. But, you know, it is so important to have these ceremonies and they can be done, you know, with little budget. It just looks different than a traditional funeral. And I
Mhm.
know that that's somewhat of a grief process in itself if somebody is expecting to have a funeral, right? Um, but you know, I always encourage people if that's a barrier, let's find ways. Let's find ways that you can do this. I've had people who haven't had ceremony at all, not even celebrations of life, and they've done that years later. And say, man, I wish I would have done that sooner, right?
Mhm. And there is a
So
question about that.
yeah,
Do you want to address that later?
absolutely. Go ahead.
Well, the question is, what are some of the 501c3s that might help with funeral costs?
Yeah, so it depends on what the population is. I know of a lot just through the Haven Network regarding babies and children. So I know that there's a couple funeral homes in the area that will do no cost funerals for babies and children. Um, uh, I'm blanking on it. It's off of 9th Street. Starts with an S. Why am I blanking that? I'll have to get back to you on that one, but I can't stop thinking of Sunset, but it's not Sunset.
But
Um,
it's not Bright Point or the.
no, it's not Bright Point.
But here's the thing. I that's, could you talk a little bit about what the Haven Network is?
Yeah, so the Haven Network is a perinatal hospice and bereavement center. So what that looks like is if a baby has passed away or a mother has miscarried, we send miscarriage kits to OBGYNs so that if it's an early miscarriage, they take home this box and it's got a bunch of different resources in it. We run groups at the Haven Network for parents, not just moms, but parents who have experienced a miscarriage, stillbirth, or infant death. Um, and what we provide at the hospital is that immediate support. So we have volunteers who go up. They're professional photographers that go up along with somebody who's called Family Services, and they're all volunteers. And they go up and they take photos of the baby individually, and then they take photos with the family if the family so chooses. And they make memory boxes, so handprints and footprints and diapers, and we clothe the baby. And then we provide them with resources not only in our community, but the ones that we offer. And like I said, we run groups. We've got a group of moms. Actually, they just did this over the weekend. We have a memorial brick place off of Sinisippi, that bike path there. And you can purchase a brick. Actually, today is the last deadline. If you want to purchase a brick, you have to turn the deadline or the form into Fitzgerald Funeral Home. But we present the bricks every year, the new ones or, and the old ones. And we present them the first Sunday in October at what's called the Walk to Remember. And we do a walk in memory of babies and children who have passed away. So there's a lot more to the Haven Network than just those immediate services. I provide volunteer therapy for anybody involved, whether it's parents, whether it's siblings, whether it's grandparents, anybody who's affected by the loss. But we are a 501(c)(3), so but we will help other people. So if we had a family come to us and say, I know you don't service our age, right? But we need help paying for a funeral. Okay, let's find you a 501(c)(3), right? So we would do all the research and help find with that. I have no problem doing that. So that's a little bit about the Haven Network. We work with the local hospitals. So there's 3 of them. We work with OSF, UW, and Mercy.
All right. Well, thank you. I hope that answers the
Yeah.
question. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and hold some of these other questions to the end, and we'll let you in the interest of time.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Do we have a significant amount of more questions?
Actually, there was one about, are there any for veterans?
Ooh, okay, I will, let me answer that one at the end.
Okay, great. Okay. And then there's a comment, my volunteer,
yeah.
Joy, has entered a question. I might just activate her microphone and let her ask that. That's about something different. I don't know if you want to have that at the end. I think that'd probably be a good time. Okay, let's have you go ahead with your presentation, and Joy will just activate your microphone for that other one.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. And you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, and then a very common question I get too is, can you have grief without mourning? Because they're different, and the answer is absolutely yes. So we naturally grieve every experience or when we experience loss. But what gets us through to what we call reconciliation, I don't ever say you move on. I don't think those words will ever come out of my mouth unless I've somehow, lost my mind, but we don't move on from grief. We reconcile with it. So yes, you can have grief without mourning, but it is hard to get to that reconciliation or healing at that end. Again, there's really no end to it, but at the point where you feel reconciled with your loss. So, but if you do have grief without mourning, it does present a risk to experiencing something like complex grief, which again is a whole nother seminar. But it's where you kind of get stuck in your grief. And I'm sure people have examples of other people that they might know that never moved on from, or move forward with, or, this person that they lost. So I could sit here and spend an hour just solely on examples giving you. But one I have specific is I know a gentleman who experienced a loss a significant loss when they were 8 years old, and they came to me 50 years later. And we back processed, so we processed from the first loss they had ever experienced, and world of a difference. And they had mentioned that they had wished they had come so much sooner. And such a success story of a human being, and so proud of this person. But this person they grieved growing up, but they never mourned until they were older. So that's kind of a small example of, can you grieve without mourning? So, and then I'll let you go to the next slide. And that is my most commonly asked question, is how long does grief last? So my rebuttal to that one is always, well, how high is up, right? Nobody actually knows. There's not a model that says you grieve here, here, and here. But unfortunately for mental health clinicians, if you are a clinician listening to this, there is something in the DSM-5 called prolonged grief disorder, that I will never diagnose, because I don't believe grief is ever a disorder unless it's complex. Prolonged grief disorder is any adult grieving longer than 1 year, and any child 18 years or younger grieving more than 6 months. And to me, that's a little wacky, right? Because if you think of any loss you've ever experienced, whether it was a pet, whether it was a human, whether it was a job, right, or a house, or, you're allowed to grieve that for the rest of your life. And I don't expect somebody who's lost a child to 1 year. Oftentimes that first year doesn't even count in my book, because that first year is something what we call psychic numbing, or a grief fog, right? Most people don't often remember. So if it's a significant loss, they don't remember a lot about the first year. So how are you to tell me that I only have 1 year to grieve when I'm going through all the first, and I'm really just not even, I'm just checking boxes, right? So, and then I always like to share this information with you, because I just think this is just so silly. So there was a street survey done in the early 2000s, in Chicago. So, I'm a little embarrassed to say it was in Chicago, but it was in Chicago, and they had a multiple choice question of how long does grief last? And I don't remember the exact multiple choice options, but it was 24 hours, 48 hours, 1 week, or, 1+ year. The most commonly answered multiple choice question or option was 48 hours. So here in Chicago, we believed in the early 2000s that it most commonly lasts for 48 hours. And that's wild to me, because it shows how uneducated we are about the topic, but it also shows how, as a culture, we just move people along so quickly. Hence why a lot of people come to me and say, like, I feel crazy. I feel like, I can't function. I can't do this. And it's like, well, yeah, because you're expecting a 48-hour turnaround, where I'm expecting a, couple of year turnaround. So, and sometimes it can be daunting, when people say, how long is it? And you say, oh, the rest of your life. But in reality, if you soften that and say, you're never going to not miss this person, right? It can make a world of a difference. So, all right, we can move on to the next one. And for me, the work that I do, I really focus on what is called the 6 central needs of mourning. Dr. Alan Wolfelt came up with these when he studied grief. He studied grief when he was 16. He studied under a lot of different individuals, and he is what I consider to be the grief guru. But that first central need is acknowledging the reality of the loss. The second one is embracing the pain of the loss. Third is remembering the person who died or the experience you lost. 4 is developing a new self-identity. 5 is searching for meaning. And I want to explain that meaning can mean something completely different to one person than it does another. And then number 6 is letting others help you. So now and always. So always allowing other people to provide that support to you. But going back to number 5 with that meaning, some people assume that when you lose somebody significant, you have to go out and you have to start a 501(c)(3) or have a career change, or do something gigantic. But in reality, all it is you have to find meaning within your heart, right? What that looks like. And meaning doesn't mean that you're okay with the loss, or you're at peace with it, or that you accept it. Meaning can be a multitude of different things. And again, it's not a one size fits all. It's different. So, and I could do a whole seminar on the six central needs of mourning because I think they're so important. But if you guys ever do get a chance to look at Dr. Alan Wolfelt's work, this is kind of the meat and potatoes of what I do in my therapy with my clients, and then also just his work is just very, very, very renowned. So, okay, we can go to the next. Okay, and then common symptoms of grief. So these are what I would consider to be normal, not within the realm of complex loss. And these are also, it's kind of like food, right? Like in moderation, right? So if you're, like the second one, lethargy of grief, if you're feeling lethargic, as long as it's in moderation, you're not lethargic for, days on end or, long periods of time. So take these common symptoms and utilize them and recognize that they're all within moderation of each other. So again, those common symptoms. So anhedonia, we don't often utilize that word much anymore. It's also just known as depression, right? Inability to feel joy, feeling numb, or having those depressive symptoms. So if you have somebody who had just lost a partner or a child or, you know, um, somebody in their family or an animal, and they're not getting out of bed, they're probably experiencing some anhedonia, right? So we can allow that for a short period of time, but we don't want to allow it for a long period. I always tell my people, okay, if you're in bed for a day or two, that's okay, but then you need to get out of bed, right? Because we don't want to allow that to spiral. Lethargy of grief, very common. People actually get really afraid of this one because lethargy, oftentimes in the medical world, means something's very, very, very wrong. But in reality, lethargy of grief is very common, right? Is that, well, it includes that short-term memory loss, all of those things. The next one is short-term, also just grief in totality. So it'll come back typically, but it does take some time. And then polyphasic behaviors. A lot of people have not heard of this, but often have experienced this. It's just a fancy term. So polyphasic behaviors, the best way I explain this is if you are cleaning your house and you had a method prior to your loss, and maybe you started in the laundry room, and then you clean the laundry room, you go to the kitchen, you clean the kitchen, you go to the living room, then you clean that, and so on and so forth. And then you've cleaned your whole house in stages, right? Polyphasic behaviors is walking into that laundry room, tossing in a load of laundry, or cleaning the laundry room, you realize you have a pair of shoes, and those shoes need to go into your closet. So then you go over to your closet, you put those shoes away, but you realize, I really needed to hang up that shirt, right? So now I'm in my bedroom, hanging up the shirt, gonna take it back to the closet. I find something in my closet that needs to go in the bathroom, right? So there's so many different things that you don't follow, and it's all kind of all over the place. So those polyphasic behaviors, it's not just cleaning, it can be scheduling, it can be a multitude of things. It's just something that cleaning is probably the most easy example because a lot of people experience that. Sleep, appetite, and mood disturbances. So sleep changes, whether you sleep too much or too little. Appetite, whether you have an increase of appetite or decrease in appetite. About 70% of people do experience appetite changes, whether it's one or the other. And then transient thoughts of resisting going forward. So in a healthy manner, right? So thinking things like, I don't want to go do this because that means that this person is actually gone, right? I had somebody who didn't want to go into the new year. That's actually very common if they pass away towards that second half of the last year, where they don't want to go into the new year because that new year means that new leaf is turned and that person is no longer coming with. Say they passed away in 26 and, here in January, we're moving into 2027, they could say, nope, I don't want to go in there, right? And then grief bursts. Grief bursts are very common. Were you going to say something, Warren?
I was just thinking that there's a question here from an anonymous attendee, and it says, I've been worrying slash grieving my dad's passing for years now and feel like I'm cheating the time he is alive. I'm always thinking, what will it feel like or look like in navigating those next steps? What's that called? Oh, so this looks like anticipating It doesn't, if I'm understanding the question correctly, uh, doesn't look like dad has already passed. This is in anticipation. And the person who uh, asked this question, please clarify or let me know if I didn't
Yeah,
get that right.
I'm
Can you?
with you, Warren. It looks like it might be some sort of anticipatory grief. Right. It doesn't, and if the anonymous person can confirm that for us, but I would say that's anticipatory grief. That you're always thinking what it's going to feel like, or you have that fear. That's also intense anxiety too. So you could be a person who struggles with anxiety, you could have high functioning anxiety, you could be treated for anxiety that you might already be, right? I'm not sure, but I would definitely, if you came into my office and said, I'm worrying about a parent's loss, or, and they haven't passed yet, it's for sure that anticipatory grief.
Okay, because I was actually thinking that was, excuse me, at first that it was how it's hard to let go, or that it goes on and on. Um,
Yeah.
anyway, thank you.
Yeah, it is definitely a tough fear to have. And, if you have a therapist, I would certainly try and work with that therapist regarding that. Because that is, it's a really hard thing because like you mentioned you felt like you were cheating time, because you don't want to always be thinking about what's happening, what's going to happen, what's going to happen. You want to be in that mindful journey there where you're just in that moment. So if you have a therapist, or maybe you don't have a therapist and you need a fit, I can find one in the community for you. um,
Okay, I think
so
that I hope that answers the question, and
yeah, I hope so too.
I
So, and I hope you
appreciate
get
you.
help with
Thank
that
you.
because that is hard, very
Okay.
hard. So, okay. And then grief burst. Grief burst is just a softer way to say like triggers, right? So I like to call them grief bursts because you're remembering that person, whether it's a song that comes on and you feel that well of tears that just come up and you're crying, right? Allow that to come out, because that burst is eventually, it might burst, right? One of these times you might be in a grocery store and say, oh, we used to grocery shop together, right? That's a grief burst. You might see a car that maybe that person drove. Um, so grief burst can come from anything, can be any sort of activator or trigger, and it certainly can be at any moment, and I think that's the hardest part about the symptom of grief, because it might be while you're at work, right? You might be dealing with a customer, or you are in the middle of the grocery store and you're like, oh, I don't want to cry in the middle of the store right now. So be mindful and kind to yourself and give yourself grace that those grief bursts are a very normal thing, and share those with other people. I think it's very important to share those, to say, what, I thought of so and so today because I saw this, yeah, I cried and that was okay. Right. And then wanting to be by or carrying what we call linking objects. So linking objects are anything that link us to that person. So for instance, if somebody loses a spouse, right, you have half of that house is all of their stuff. So everything, including the home, typically will be a linking object. Over time, those lessen. Um, if they don't, right, then we might be looking at some complex loss. But I mean, when I say time, I mean time. I don't mean 6 months to a year. You have to go through the house and get rid of things by any means. I'm talking a decade or more, right? That you haven't touched the room that that person went in. Um, Things like that. Maybe not quite a decade, but a reasonable amount of time. So linking object can be anything. It can be a necklace, it can be a piece of clothing, it can be just a little trinket, maybe they gave you. But again, you should have a ton of linking objects in the beginning, oftentimes, and then they should shrink and soften over time. So. Okay, and then actions to facilitate mourning. So again, in the chat, if you guys have any ideas, I would love to hear your ideas because they're different and I'm always looking for more. Because everybody's different in the way of, not everybody loves to journal. Not everybody loves to, do the same things. Not everybody's crafty. So if you guys do have different ideas than ones that I listed, and the ones that I listed, there's a million more out there. But I wanted to give just a few examples there. So actions to facilitate that mourning would be talking or writing about the person who died. Again, like journaling, you can do full journals, you can do bullet point journals, staying connected to linking objects. So that's, if you have a piece, I know a lot of people will wear, jewelry with like the cremains in it, or that's a very common linking object. So staying connected to those things, not necessarily, getting rid of everything, but staying connected and, remembering that person. If you have somebody who's been utilized by a funeral home, then, a thumbprint oftentimes will be had, and you can order jewelry, whether it's through the funeral home or a third party. And, a lot of people like to feel that fingerprint. Displaying photos of the person who died, super important. I know sometimes in that early stages of grief that it can be difficult to look at the photos, but when somebody passes away, I don't necessarily recommend just putting them all away. I think we should definitely look at them. And then visiting places of special significance. So if there's a restaurant you guys always went to, or a park, or maybe a cemetery, right, where the person's buried. So special significance can mean a lot to a lot of different people. So whatever you found to be significant. I had a person who their significant place wasn't necessarily one space. It was driving up in Wisconsin to look for eagles. They had no roadmap, no nothing, just went and driving, right? So it can be something as simple as that. Reviewing photo albums, or even making photo albums. I have some kiddos in here that I make photo albums with, to kind of facilitate that mourning and sharing those stories. I think story sharing is very important too. I didn't put that on here, but super important to talk about the person, to share those, whether they're good stories, bad stories. We can be realistic, right? Some people, we're not all kind all the time, so we're human. It's okay to share the not so good stories too. And then ceremonies or nodal events. So nodal events are anything like, if you guys wanted to celebrate some people call it an anniversary, some people call it an angelversary, right? The day that the person died. Ceremonies such as funerals, celebrations of life, things like that. Those are also ways to activate that mourning. I think that those are great ways. Again, those are just some ideas. So, and I did see, because Warren, I can see the chat actually. Says you can write a letter and place it in the coffin. I did that once. I think that's a great idea, right? Because then the letter is getting taken with that person. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful way to do that too, to facilitate that mourning. So, okay. And then when to seek help. This is often kind of that not cut and dry question, right? But oftentimes grief, it should lessen over time, or it should what we call soften. But if it's hardened and the person is just, you can just tell they're just downright miserable, right? They're not kind, they're just kind of mean. And all their symptoms have hardened. Maybe they do stay in bed, maybe they just don't really do anything. They're just checking boxes of life. They're kind of becoming part of that among the living dead, right? That's kind of when we need to seek help too. Difficulty talking or thinking about the person who died over a long period of time. Again, I want to stress that long period of time, because oftentimes the average time when people reach out after a loss is between 18 and 36 months after a death, is when somebody finally reaches out. And that is so important to note in regard to that prolonged grief disorder, right? Because if you're reaching out 18 to 36 months, you are still grieving. So, there's no reason you should be considered to have a disorder in that way. So a long period of time, I would say, if you can't talk about the loss more than 2 years, start seeking help out, or if you're within that 18 to 36 month bracket and you're really still struggling with daily functioning, reach out for somebody. And then when grief is affecting your daily functioning. So if you're not getting out of bed, if you're not showering, if you're not brushing your teeth, and if you were very functional before, you're not, maybe your house isn't clean. And it doesn't have to be completely perfect, right? Perfectionism is silly, but just when it's affecting your specific daily function, or somebody, what their function is like, and you're like, I just know they're just not doing well, right? If it's affecting their job, their performance in their job, those are when to seek help too. And then difficulty moving that grief into mourning. So if it's, again, somebody who just cannot talk about the person, that's over a long period of time, again, that's also another way to seek, or when to seek help. And then we'll go to the next one when you're ready, Warren. And then how to seek help. So call a grief-informed therapist. And I always like to to preface it with the grief informed, right? We have a lot of people who in school we've learned about grief, but we learned the 5 stages of grief, right? And as we know that that's not necessarily true. So if you have a therapist and and it doesn't take much to learn about grief, right? So as long as they're grief informed, and you're more than welcome to ask that of a therapist, like, are you grief informed? I think that that's important. And then seeking support through family and friends. So if you have a good support system, not everybody does, or they don't have them close by, and I understand that too. So if that's not something that's feasible for you, maybe calling that therapist would be a good idea. And then following through with a support group or a church. In the area, we have one support group called Grief Share. It's through our local churches. We've got a widower group, and then I run a widows group. So those are a few that I know of, and I'm not sure. Will you guys have any groups for grief specific?
Actually, it's something that I've talked to our FaithNet organizers about starting. And as a
Yeah,
matter of fact, Joy, who uh, put in the question that we're going to address at the end, um, is taking facilitator training. So we're I am going to say that we will have a grief group starting soon from NAMI, but there is one from one of the northwest suburbs NAMI organizations that's on their website, and they are on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. So there is one online right now, and we are in the process of creating one here at NAMI Northern Illinois.
wonderful.
Mhm.
Well, let me know because I always have people asking.
Yeah, I think it's something that's very important and that is needed.
Very
And
needed.
yeah, it doesn't really fit into our regular support group format.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have a hard time. I'm only one person, so I try and focus on one group at a time. Right now, I've got a widows group. But again, the Haven Network, too, if you've experienced a miscarriage, infant death, or stillbirth, they do support groups as well, too.
As
So,
a new grandparent, I can't imagine what
yeah,
must be like. I'm glad I can. All right.
right. Yep. So, but those are ways to seek help. That's my next slide is just our reflections and questions. So, I appreciate you all sitting with me and learning the basics of grief. I know that it's oftentimes a heavy topic and one that most of us like to stay away from. So I appreciate that. So, okay, did we have questions
All
or
right.
concerns?
This is going to be interesting. I didn't get a chance to set up a workstation next to me, so Joy is on my cell phone there, and I'm going to see how this works. I'm not push the button that says "Allow to talk." Joy, is that you ready? Okay. Um, I'm going to go ahead and read. Let's see. Okay, Joy.
Hello.
Yeah, I think you could even turn on your camera if you wanted to. But anyway, go ahead, Joy.
Okay. Well, I don't know if it was a question, but my boyfriend ended his life on July 5th of 2023 and feels like it's a totally different grief, like complicated grief. It's been almost like it will be 3 years on Sunday, and I've worked through it a lot. Comes and goes in waves. Um, like I said, it's a different type of grief. It's not like a regular type. And it's tough. But I've done like a lot of healing through this. I've had a lot of supported people in my life. Um, mainly like a counselor, chaplain type person, and he's dealt with it. So it made it a lot easier to help me get through it. And in my life. So I'm just so grateful to have all these people in my life and having this webinar.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I mean, that's a very tough loss, and you're absolutely right. That falls within the complicated grief category just due to manner of loss, right? Um, so I'm grateful that you have a network. I'm grateful you have somebody you can talk to like that chaplain. I think that that's so important, and that's what helps you get to that reconciliation.
Thank you so much.
Mhm. Yeah.
Thank you, Joy. All right, let's see. Um, all right, so uh, there is actually a question out there. Will we get an email of the recording of the webinar? Actually, the recording goes onto our YouTube page. Uh, so we'll be uploading this to YouTube well, soon after this finishes. I know tomorrow's a holiday, but we'll try and get it done today. But if you go to YouTube and just type in NAMI Northern Illinois, you'll see a page of all of the recorded webinars that we've done at noontime. But yes, actually, I don't know if I can email the actual recording to you, as I guess is the short form of that. But we normally will email the slides. So if you want to, I guess whoever put in that question, does that answer your question? You can go to YouTube after probably tomorrow and be able to see this entire recording again. So that's my answer to that. This is such a emotional topic for me at this time.
Yeah.
And I'm sure for a lot of people, it's the same.
Yeah. There is one more question Natalia was asking about. I was just looking it up for veterans to pay for funeral service for veterans. The VA, I know if you go to the VA for resources, they can provide you with resources for that. But I did find a lot of it is a lot of the work that I look up, a lot of the 501(c)(3)s is just simply Google. So I just Googled a bunch of things and a VA burial benefit locator came up. So if you just type that into Google and it can just come up, it comes up with like needs programs for veterans for burial services. And literally all I typed in was burial services for veterans. So I don't know of any, and I haven't worked with any off the top of my head, but that's what I just found on Google there. And that was just a 30-second search. So if I come across anything, I will send an email out to my network of therapists and whatnot, and I will see if anybody knows of anything. So, and then I can email Lauren or, NAMI, and then we can get the information forwarded to you if I find something. But I don't know of any specific off the top of my head for veterans, but I'm sure that there are some out there because most of the time when 501(c)(3)s pay for funeral services, it's often a specialized population like children or, certain diseases that people die from or veterans. So.
And I know that one of our resources that is available through NAMI Northern Illinois are our mental health advocates. And our number here, 815-963-2470. Extension 1 is for Kinsey, who is our mental health advocate, and she can help link people to the proper resource. My extension is number 3, and I'm the program and outreach coordinator. So things like creating that grief group is what I do. Let's see. I don't see any other questions, but we do have a few more minutes if anyone else would like to share. Let's see, there are things open here in the Q&A. Let me make sure I close the ones that we've already talked about. Okay, so we've talked about the resources for veterans. I see some thank yous, and I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you very much, Cody.
Of course.
Could I ask, and that's maybe too personal, but how did you form this interest in helping people?
How did I form this interest? Not too personal. I do share my story. So I have done a lot of public speaking on it, and the Haven Network is very close to my heart. I did not utilize them, but I have 2 infant daughters who did pass away, one in 2014 and one in 2017. That kind of kickstarted me to seek out grief therapy in 2017, not after the 2014. And it was just something that I was really interested in. And this is where I kind of talk about that meaning, like you don't have to go have a whole career change like I did. I worked in the financial field and um I was like, this is something I really just want to do. I want to help other people's grief processes and experience, like help them, walk that path of grief because it isn't an easy walk. And with my losses, my first daughter, I mean, it was a year and a half, well, no, 2.5 years between the two of them. So by the time I built myself up from my first daughter, Eliana, who passed away, um, boom, it happens again. It was a genetic issue, unfortunately, that we experienced. And I was mad. I was like, wait a second. I just got through this, right? Now I have to do this again. So I was angry. So I really wanted to help other people. Um, and this is another reason why I would love to have a bereaved parents group. It is as of July 1st to National Bereaved Parents Month, if you don't already know that. So if you know any bereaved parents, reach out to them and tell them you're thinking of them. But that is just a brief tidbit of how I did get into this field and how I became a therapist. So.
That is something that you mentioned, that sometimes people take their grief and turn it into
Mhm.
something to help others. And we have um, a lot of the local foundations that NAMI is connected with. I'm thinking of the Tommy Corral Memorial Foundation for one, and
Yes.
Marshmallows Hope.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, as I mentioned, the NAMI is has our mental health advocates, but as program coordinator and just really how NAMI began, um,
Yeah.
we tend to try and be a first place that people can think of uh, if they don't know what to do with the feelings that they're having. Um, Call NAMI, reach out to us, and
Absolutely.
if it's something that we don't uh, deal in specifically, we will get you connected with some of the other organizations in
Yeah.
our area, or really it's an alliance, national alliance on mental
Right.
illness. There are over 600 affiliates across the country. So no matter what part of the um, country or even the world, uh, thank goodness for the internet, we can get you
Oh my
connected
goodness.
with some
And
of
to
the
get,
resources.
the video Zoom, meetings and things like that, it's wonderful. I do see a question that somebody just asked. It says, can somebody see two therapists, including one who specializes in grief? That is dependent upon the therapist, both therapists. I am fully okay with that, so long as we're not doing contradictory work. Um, the therapist and I. But it depends on the therapist. Some therapists are okay with it, some are not. It just is kind of an individualized response. So I would say probably a good majority of people are okay with it. For instance, I would specialize in grief, and there's some people that I have that will go seek what's called EMDR therapy, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So it's just a different type of therapy, and we'll work together. The therapist and I we'll usually do it either on alternating weeks, or kind of make a schedule. So it just kind of depends what the situation is. But the answer is most of the time is.
But definitely talk to your
Yeah, make
resources.
sure you talk to both therapists before you kind of toss it in. Because then they'll
Awesome.
say, what? You're seeing someone else?
Yeah, it's a little more complicated than uh,
Yeah.
one would think.
Yeah. And you wouldn't want two therapists contradicting work, and then be like, I don't know you. So
Yeah. Good question. Excellent
yeah, that's a
question.
good question.
And really, I really appreciate you helping with this
Yeah, of
fielding these
course.
questions. Uh, Amazing. Um, I don't know if maybe I should put your contact slide back up. It was on the very first slide. How can
Oh, I
people?
don't believe I put my contact information now that I think about it.
Well, it did say Four Corners,
It did say. I was gonna say
but
I could put my email in there too.
if you just add that to the PowerPoint and then send it to me,
Perfect.
the person who asked if we um, could, well, I'll put a link to that, the PowerPoint presentation in the description of the recording. So people who look at the recording can get to the slides.
Okay.
And if anybody would like the slides specifically sent to them, um, our emails here are our first name at naminorthernillinois.org. And I'll just change my screen name here so that, oops, so they can see that written out. So if there are no more questions, I know we have a couple minutes left, but I really want to again thank you, Cody.
Thank you.
This is very timely for me.
Yeah,
I
it is.
appreciate it. Uh, Grief is something that, as you say, doesn't have a time limit to it, and uh, until I had that personal experience in my family a few years ago, thought that it should be last a certain amount of time, um, and I still feel bad for uh, the things that people do in trying to help that I helped do to support my sister when she lost her husband suddenly. But until you experience it personally, you can do some things
True.
that are kind of hurtful, but not
Well, you
intentionally.
only do best with what you know, right?
Hmm.
Your
Yeah.
intentions were good.
And yeah, hearing your story, as I mentioned, it's unimaginable. None of us know what anybody else is feeling. And so one of the things that I encourage people not to say is, I know exactly how you feel,
Oh, yeah,
because it's not really true.
that's very true. And if it ever starts with at least, it's not helpful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, we could have you, well, we will invite you to come back as often
Sounds
as you
good.
would like to. Thank you so much for,
Sounds good. Thank you for having me.
yeah.
Thank you, guys.
All right. And thank all of you who have participated in this seminar and those who will see it in the future. This has been Leading the Conversation from NAMI Northern Illinois. Our website is www.naminorthernillinois.org, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.